All right, so let's design a firearm real quick and start modeling this thing. And we're going to do this very differently. We're going to do this as almost abstract. So one of the problems you're going to have with firearms usually is that based on ergonomics, right? And so it's based to fit the human hand or the length of the arm, things like that. So you start with like your templates. If you're doing a pistol, you can kind of sketch these ideas out, try to figure out your ergonomics a little bit, maybe. Right. But we're looking for big shapes, big forms, big designs first. And that's it. It's really the name of the game. So when you have these kinds of things established a little bit, you need to think about like, can you fit a finger here, two there, or three there? Those kinds of things, right? You can run with these into 3D. This could be a template that you use in 3D as well. You don't have to just do this with drawing, right? You want to keep sketching on this thing, you could, but it's not necessarily required, all right? So leave it a little bit more vague. All we're going to do is place some basic ideas for the shape, where the trigger might go. Okay. Is this thing going to have it grips a little straight? We could probably rock it forward a little bit. Going to have a decent handle, etc. Okay. And let's leave a straight line here so we don't have any wrong impressions with anything right off the bat. Magazine. So a fun thing about the magazine is you can take the idea of the mag here, copy it, paste it, run a new layer now, and you paste it, right? So I'm gonna reset the brush real quick, but we can rough out the idea of where this thing is gonna go. Try to keep those lines parallel. That's helpful. But something like that, and you might need a chamber on the other side, right? Somewhere in this vicinity. All right, so we're gonna use that as a template, but we're drawing the chamber on this layer. We want to pull the mag out. Okay. And we'll have to size all this appropriately in 3D later. And then we can do the chamber now up here. There you go. So that's our template, guys. And this is how fast this should go. All right, we're gonna go to the desktop. We're gonna save this as a PNG file. Say this is pistol. Okay, we'll go to Blender, the key, right view, Shift A, create image reference. Pull that reference image in. And so delete the cube for a sec. One of the issues you're going to have, like I was saying, was the ergonomics, right? Blender.org, there's a download section that has some example files. One of those happens to be these base meshes for human anatomy, which is great because we can pull this hand in now, right? When we pull this hand in, we can rotate it. You have to set up the asset browser with this thing if you want to do it like that. But we can set up the human hand. We can pull it out. We can do this number. The hand is the right size. This is not. So we scale this to the hand. Potentially, we'll move the hand over. And now, let's rotate this on Y 180 degrees real quick. So it's like this. We don't have to pose it or anything to kind of get the right idea here of what we're doing. We just have to kind of line it up, put the small of the thumb here in the right area, make sure we can reach the trigger and get it going approximately like this. All right, so we can see we got room for 3 fingers. We got basically the trigger is going to be able to be accessible. Uh, this is all working out just like this, and this should follow kind of the topology here, or the flow of the hand itself. So we're in a pretty good position right now. We don't have too much going on here that we can't work with. All right, now this reference, let's go ahead and just drop the opacity on it, and we can add a cylinder as well. So when we add this cylinder, it's going to come in. It's very large. Let's scale it down real quick. And what we want to do here is we want to figure out like what kind of caliber we're going to use, and use some kind of base real world thing if you're doing a firearm. Like if it's a 9 millimeter, if it's a heavier weapon, like a heavier pistol, use 9 millimeter, 10 millimeter, whatever the case. You can of course use other rounds, 45 cal, things like that. Look up the diameters of them, and what you're going to do is you're going to type in the diameter over here. So let's just say this is a 9 millimeter. We'll go with 9 millimeter, 9 millimeter, right? On X and Y, we can rotate this out. This is the size of your bore. Okay, so your bore, of course, is going to be the what the bullet goes through in the barrel. Okay, so I can duplicate this thing. Shift D, right click, go into edit mode, S and Shift Y. I can scale this thing up. We'll scale it down in this direction. I want to press Control A, apply scale on this one. We're going to line this up where we think it should go, as far as the barrel will be, anyways. Somewhere like right there, maybe. Should work out fine. And it's going to meet the chamber right around here. So we'll be okay with that. And we can take this bore and we can punch it out of that cylinder. We can move this back. We can hide the hand. We don't need it no more. Let's press H and hide that. But now we can figure out if this is approximately the right size for the barrel as well. It could be thicker if it's like competition barrel or whatever. So now we end up with this kind of result here. Press 1, we'll hide the other collection, or yeah, the cutter collection basically. And so we have this kind of setup going. Good. That's great. And it's all scaled and it's all size. Here's the problem you're going to have when you're doing, like, say, a cube. You bring it in. First of all, they come in, they're really large. That's something you probably don't want. So just when you create the cube, come over here, type in a new number. You notice that I'm using millimeters, but let's say 20 millimeters. Okay. Now that's the problem you're going to run into when you're trying to use something like a bevel modifier, right? You can see it's really touchy, first of all. But next up, besides that, you're gonna have to hold shift while doing that if you're using hard ups. The values over here for the offset, you can see when you drag these things around, they're also very touchy. So it's easier to type in a number, but when you're using meters, you're doing like 0.025 or whatever the case, right? So go to your scene settings, or excuse me, yeah, scene settings under the units section. Change it to millimeters for firearms. It works out pretty well. You don't want to change the unit scale. Okay. I know a lot of guys do that. Trust me, it causes problems. Don't do it. The length is fine though. And so we can use this now um, well, we can line these up with machine tools. Use all your add ons, use all your modeling techniques available. But we can definitely line this thing up now on X and Z, do this number. We can block it out, move it in edit mode so that way I think it's a little bit more flush on the top as it's supposed to be anyways. So that we end up with a nice little chamber section as well. If we move this, you see the barrel doesn't move with it. Sometimes you still want to grab these things and you might want to parent them. Control P, parent with object, keep transform so it'll move with it. You can set up hard ops or box cutter to always parent. I think box cutter parents by default, but hard ops doesn't. So something to think about there. And you actually, a lot of times you don't want it to do that as well, but generally speaking, let's go to preferences real quick for hard ops. Oops, there we go. And I find it's more useful to leave it on usually and just unparent it when I don't need it to. So it's going to be something in like properties, I think. Somewhere in here where you can just parent everything basically. Might be miscellaneous options. Got a removal, smart apply. No, 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 it's not in there then. All right, anyways, it's somewhere in here. That's why I didn't want to touch it in this video, but it's a little hidden wherever it is. It could be when you turn hard ops on over here, behavior. Yeah, it's kind of a hidden option. It's somewhere in here. I know it is, but I just don't remember where. All right, anyways, so you'll have to look for that one. You can make it always parent basically. But all right, so we got that out of the way. That's good. And so later on, we can do something like join this to this. So we do a Boolean union. All right. When we union those two together, obviously you can see we get the bevel applied to it. So we can pull that bevel out like so. But you see, we can't quite hit what we want here. So we want to be able to type in values here that are a little bit more reasonable. So like zero point 0.5 maybe, something like that. Also, this is going to be cutting just the cylinder, I believe. Yep. And so we may not necessarily want to do that either. So the cylinder, we can select it, hit QE, get rid of the Boolean on it. And now we can take that cutter that's hidden. It'd be hard to find it. You got to select it off the list maybe. And where did it go? There it is. Did it delete the cutter? No. Alt H. It's parented, so that's why we're having issues. Alt P, clear out, clear, and keep. Okay, yeah. When you parent something, it goes in as a sub object of the object, but it should be in the cutter collection still, which is kind of weird. But whatever the case, we can do this. We can get through it. All right. When we see things like this occurring, a lot of times you'll hear turn loop slide off to correct that. Loop slide's not actually the problem for this, by the way. It's really what it is it's just bad topology for a Boolean. So here, what you want to do is go into edit mode with this shape. Just do a loop cut down the middle. And what that does is it just adds that additional edge there now. So loop slide actually work out just fine. You see nothing changes when it's on now. So we can do things like that if needed. Right. And so we have this going on, which is great. We can do things like chamfers if needed, right? We want to go through and do that number. And so modeling firearms is going to be not necessarily a fast thing. One of the easiest ways to get started with it, though, is doing planes. Rotate them 90 degrees, and we could have scaled that first, maybe, but a lot of times you'll find that planes just work really good for blocking shapes. You just start laying out a plane. You can extrude vertices as well and do like little in-gun vertex kind of arrangements and then fill in them, et cetera, et cetera. But doing this number is super beneficial. Just poly modeling, guys. Straight poly modeling. Make sure your origin point's in the middle. You pull this out a little bit, just move it. Make sure you can cover up the chamber perhaps. And what you can do is you can just add a solidify for now. Send it out the other way. You can add a mirror. And so when you add the mirror, you bisect it and you just make sure you flip it accordingly to the right direction there. And this is going to be your width basically, right? So when you move this in, oh, we got to flip the wrong way. We move that in and out. This is our base, okay? And we can punch out another hole for this for the barrel later on if we wanted to. We don't have to do it just yet. We could do a chamfer if we wanted it. Oh, sorry, we can't do a chamfer yet. So until we can collapse the solidify down, what we can actually do is just start doing knife cuts, Boolean cuts with box cutter. We can start chiseling this thing up like this as well. Okay. This has a major benefit to it, by the way, in the sense that like we could take this base object, Shift D to duplicate it, right click, convert it to a mesh, go into edit mode. We're going to hit Alt S, scale it all in, grab these bottom faces and just pull them right out the bottom. So now we could do things like this as well, where we do a Boolean cut with that. And you can see what happens. We now hollowed everything out as best as we needed to. Now you don't have to hollow it like this right away. This isn't something you have to do. You can wait until later and just do the exterior components and then start hollowing things out later on, perhaps. But sometimes you might want to do this because you might want to be able to like punch out, say, the back section here. That might be something you want to do as well, right? But then you can take this cutter at the same time, do another box cut with it. What you'll see is we can cut through here. We can start creating those kinds of shapes we might need in order to make this a usable slide as well. So a lot of little cool Boolean in-gun modeling techniques work out non-destructively, including the barrel we could have did with a non-destructive cylinder. So something a lot of people don't realize is hard ops has non-destructive components that you can use, such as the cylinder here. The benefit of these things is that first of all, you can change. Well, I'll screw there, but let's do. Let's see if I can remember which ones do which steps. Maybe. Yeah. Okay. Steps do this one. So you can increase and decrease the resolution of a cylinder and keep it non-destructive, basically, using these different modifiers. So if you want to turn the chamfer off, you can do that. You want to make this thing a different size. We're going to adjust, I think this one. Yeah, okay. So that top screw right there, we can adjust the size. So we can do non-destructive cylinders too if we wanted to. You can almost do everything non-destructive for a long time, at least on a firearm, which is quite good. And so when you want to do other things, you turn on box cutter, you want to do an ejection port, you can do that number right in there. Okay. Go all across the middle, perhaps. Oh, you see what happened here? We did the Boolean and it disappeared. And the reason is because we're using this mirror modifier, right? Well, here's the thing. You can mirror your base mesh, but you want to do it before all the booleans. Okay. And you want to do it something like that, and you'll see that this doesn't actually work the way we expect it to because we got, well, this is cutting this side, but not this side. Okay, so QE, you mirror your cutters. Okay. That's the big thing here. You have to mirror all your cutters, and you want to bisect those things if needed, but you do mirror those instead. Okay. So that's all going to start to work out, hopefully, unless you have alignment issues, which I think we have right now. So let's see. No, we got a cutter missing. That's what it is. So we mirror across it. I'm going to use machine tools to do the mirror now. But you can see where this is starting to go, at least. We have a chamber here worked out. This big chamfer doesn't work with it. So what do we need to do to this guy here? We could readjust this basically if we wanted to. Like we could pull this side down. We could pull this side over, take the top and pull it up maybe. I think you get where that's going, right? Like there's all kinds of little fun adjustments like this we can do perhaps. But we don't have to necessarily always do that. But it could be useful to get it kind of done manually sometimes. And so I'm gonna have to symmetrize this one using Mesh Machine. Turn remove redundant center off, so we have this. And the reason is because we don't want to use a mirror necessarily on that one. So and we can leave it symmetrical. It's fine. All right, so we're in progress now. At least we're able to go through this and say like we know we want certain pieces, we don't want certain pieces, certain areas, and maybe we do both of these at the same time. Maybe we do a bevel. You're gonna bevel things, use more segments than you think you should. Like 8 might be okay, but you probably wanna go higher than you probably think you should. So maybe like 12 instead, right? And so all in all, we're gonna start working this thing out basically. And if we add a bevel modifier to this, sometimes it breaks down, sometimes it works. This bevel on this shape, just leave it a little bit larger perhaps. So you can see like 1 millimeter might work out for that one. Right. And so at some point we could shift S cursor to selected so we can create a cylinder here. Gonna come in large, and then we can just change the size to whatever, 10 millimeter perhaps. Change the depth here, and we can rotate it on X, send it through the front, go into edit mode, S and Shift Y. Shift Y, there you go, and just cut out a little space for that barrel. There we go. We're off to the show now. We can start modeling most of this firearm. I wouldn't say all of it non-destructively, but we can model a lot of it very quickly. Doing stuff like this, very non-destructive. Okay, so it's a very easy way to get into this, anyways. Now, here's the trick when it comes to ergonomics. Not everything's going to be a straight cut thing like the top here, right? Like we could go through this whole process. We can figure out how to make the back section here in this area. There's all kinds of fun stuff we can do for that. But the problem we're going to run into mostly is the grip. A lot of times these things are curvy and all kinds of other fun stuff. I already know some of you guys are going to struggle with that. Here's the trick: you use subdivision and you use booleans if you need to. Okay, that's really the trick. I'm gonna hide the hand because it's in the way, but you're more than likely going to use both at some point. There's no way around that usually. Okay, so you might extrude that up, keep it going forward at the same rate. You might take this back section, extrude that out. You can use machine tools to align things if needed. Okay, and you're just going to have to subdivide these kinds of things and polymodel them a little bit. There's no way around that for the most part. Actually, before we do that, let's just add some even loop cuts through here. And here's a fun little trick. You can use proportional editing when you're using quads, and you can do all kinds of cool little slight deviations with proportional edit if needed. So if we want to create some better curve, we can do that. We want to make this all a little bit thicker out here. All right, it's going to save you a lot of trouble as well, especially when it comes time to do things like you want to pull this whole section out down here maybe. You want to pull it out on axes. There you go. And you can see we're still going to have to symmetrize this one, so just keep that in mind. But we'll be able to do things like this now at least. Sometimes you don't want to proportionally edit, so just turn it off. You can hit O to do that too. Um, this area might be okay if we leave it like that, but sometimes it helps to maybe press K and C and start doing a knife cut in this area and see if you can't work out something here in this area like so. Oh, you know what? We could have just went out the back with that one, huh? K and C, and go out the back. So we don't have to have that edge there like that, maybe. Um, oh, maybe we would. We need the edge going up though. All right, cool. We're good. We can keep moving. Now we just got to balance things out. This is where your ergonomics usually give you a real hard time doing shapes like this, right? Because you still have to poly model, guys. There's no way around this sometimes. Could you boolean a bunch of things together and remesh them? More than likely, you could. I'm not going to say you can't, uh, but it's not necessarily going to be the easiest workflow to go through. Also, when you have things like, you see, like we can start squishing and pinching things like this, we can actually make a selection anyways. Check this out. We can do grow selection with control number pad plus. We could do things like this as well. Hit shift H, grab these here. We can use proportional edit now. And we can start to do other little edits like that perhaps. Maybe we do all of these too. And it won't influence anything that's um, not hidden basically. So, all right, so we Alt H, bring it back. Okay, and we should be able to symmetrize that one real quick. So when we subdivide that, shade it smooth, subdivide, control 2. There we go. Now we're in business because we can keep working this mesh however we need to, basically, through this process here. And we can make changes on the fly as we're modeling, guys. We can keep working this mesh and change things up. So I want some loop cuts in here, but you can see they're going out back to that point there. That's not exactly what I want. And so we would have to figure out how to run this topology around in a way where it would make more sense to us as well. So subdivision is still very powerful, but basically I might run it to here, and I want this to go down, so we have a little bit more for the front side here, perhaps. And I can take these sections, start moving them in, and creating like a bevel of sorts. Turn proportional edit off a second, and so you're going to combo all your tools together or all your techniques. As firearms are going to push your limits for sure when it comes to creating and designing things, anyway. So maybe I send that one up, and after doing that, we might get away with a loop cut here and a redirect here as well. Okay. So now we're getting somewhere. Put some loop cuts in here. Try to square them up. All right. You can even run this one out flat like this, potentially. Just maybe do an additional loop cut or a crease there at the end to make sure it just stays kind of flat out in that direction. Because you'll go back more than likely and you're going to use booleans on this object as well. So before we go through that, let's symmetrize it. Careful symmetrizing or it'll replace your mesh. But you're going to do this for a good minute, okay? There's no real way to cheat this system of modeling a firearm. It takes time and it takes effort to get a firearm modeled appropriately, but there are little things that you can just do that might help the process a bit. Like there's little weird things you can do too. Like you'll see here when we use these booleans like this, I could pull that out a little bit maybe and do like a bevel here. You see, and so we can cut and dice things up in this manner as well. There's a lot of stuff that can go into this potentially, but just little things like that all over the place that'll end up happening. So if you want to put like a cube here, and we'll make it 10 millimeters from here on out, and we'll pull that forward. Let's just do let's pull this back for a second, and we'll bevel that. Actually, let's bevel these ones first, and then we'll bevel all of that except that end section there. And you'll see that we can do a Boolean with that piece. And this is what we get. Why not unhid? I don't know. All right. Anyways, was it there the whole time and I just didn't realize it? Anyways, so we can start doing things like this. If we want to use non-destructive bevels and stuff, we can also do that. I'm going to mirror that across. Okay. And this is the name of the game when it comes to firearms modeling. Okay. You're going to block out, do your base meshes as well as you can. You're gonna push things around, you're gonna change their sizes, their dimensions, and you're just gonna get things going. Also, somebody had once said, like, why would you pay for the rotation tool in the Deus Ex version of machine tools when you can just hit Control Shift and then use like Y, X, or Z or whatever you need to do skews? Well, you can see when we try to skew this thing, it all gets messed up. Machine tools Deus Ex, you press Alt R, you can rotate in this manner. It's just a creature comfort. You don't really necessarily need it, but it's definitely really cool to be able to do that. Okay. And so we can do things like this super fast. We can align them if needed. Place the cursor back to the center there. And so we can just model on this thing as well. If we want to take like a little shortcut on this, we could add maybe like a bevel modifier. You can see we're going to have a hard time getting it just right, maybe, but we got that one, fortunately. We can do some loop cuts. Maybe we want this to be a little thicker back here, so we can scale it out. Yep, and this is the name of the game, guys. This is all you're doing when it comes to weapons modeling. Okay, you see how when they bevel these things, they look a little bit off. So there's another idea here. We can do KCA, do a knife cut here, and we'll do a knife cut here, like so. If you don't get the 5-degree increments, you customize your knife tool with in the key map section. Just press K or use search knife tool for edit mode or whatever. So we can do a bevel here, or just start the bevel, and we're going to switch it to percent. Okay, when we do a percentage bevel, it'll go out to those corners like so. Press A, M, merge by distance. Boom. And then, so that's one of the easier ways of doing things like that, perhaps. So just keep that one in mind. And next time you do a bevel, you should go back to your regular setup, I think. Uh, shouldn't be a big deal. So we have an extra vertex in there somehow. There you go. Okay, when it comes to grips and things like that, there's two ideas here. You can try to model all the grips if you want. You can do booleans of grip sections. So you would create something like a cube again, right? You might do your loop cuts all the way through. You might take this shape and uh, take the whole thing and skew it in alignment, place it where needed, scale it, all that other fun stuff. And so you might do stuff like this and then work it into position, subdivide it, and you might just cut out this shape, maybe squish it a little bit more. You might use it as a floater, first of all, on the shape if the grips are separate of sorts, right? Like they're external, like they can screw into the frame. So you might hover them a little bit and use it in that manner. Possibility. You might do booleans with them instead to get some things like this going. You can see that the great thing about that now, though, is we can control the resolution. So if it's too low resolution, we just keep going up with it, perhaps. And you can see that kind of, I didn't like that last one there, but we probably worked that out by just moving it around a little bit, maybe. But yeah, we can do this like this. Other guys like to just take um, certain pieces like this, and what they're going to do is they're going to control right click. You can do lasso select. Control and shift will be lasso deselect. But a lot of guys like to take these kinds of things later on and just paint them in Substance Painter. Like it's kind of a different way of doing it. It's not necessarily wrong. It's just a different workflow of sorts. So if you want to try to bake it, though, you can do this number. You want to do some tapers on it as well. It could be quite useful. So you can see once you do that boolean, it becomes harder to work with the. But you might do just a scale here, perhaps scale it up and make a little bit of a tapered effect, perhaps. Gotta be careful with that one, though. You could also use a modifier, simple deform modifier. Might work out well for you as well. Let's turn the wireframe off a sec. Simple deform, you can see there's taper. You can line up on a certain axis. In this case, it's the right one. All right, cool. So we can use all kinds of stuff like this, guys. Not to mention this add-on. A lot of guys are asking about this. Blender 4 broke a lot of add-ons. Okay, I don't know why. Blender does that occasionally. They break all the add-ons when they release a new version. So I'm sticking with 3.6 for now of the LTS version. But this add-on, when it gets updated eventually for 4 and later, is really good. So the thing about this thing is that it allows you to create empties real quick for things. So if you wanted to do something like a lattice modifier, you can come in here, you just click the plus sign or the little empty sign or whatever, and we've now created an empty for this thing. And you can see what's going on here. We can adjust the empty like so, okay? And actually, it's just a cube or geometry, I think, in this case. But we can create a lattice too. very quickly, so we can do edits like this with the big geometric forms a lot easier per se than trying to use the individual little points in the mesh with a proportional edit. So this is just another idea that you could potentially possibly run with anyways. I just wanted to point it out that this is something that a lot of people don't utilize in Blender because vanilla Blender, you have to set up empties for everything and it just gets frustrating. And with add-ons like this, at least you can start to do a little bit more. See, if I take all that and just scale it, it's going to scale my mesh here. And we don't even need that many control points potentially, probably use less even. But we can do all kinds of edits now and make really interesting little form changes and adjustments. All right, so there's a lot more to weapon modeling, of course. I'm not going to cover all of it in this video, but I just want to give you guys a taste of how you can go about doing some of that stuff. It's just not, it's not so apparent that this is what needs to happen or occur always. Okay, what happened there? Should have just worked just fine, but as a Boolean. Okay, there we go. Sometimes it's a little tricky. You might have to switch to exact as well. Okay, exact does work a little bit better, but if you're doing a lot of booleans, it's going to start to slow down. So just keep that in mind. And this isn't going to be a it's not necessarily a game mesh, right? Like it's supposed to be your high poly. Your game mesh, you can go back over this and retopo it if you wanted, or try to convert any of these pieces later on into the game mesh. But this is the process, guys. This is what you got to go through. Try to have fun with it as best as you can. It could be a little frustrating sometimes. There's tons of time lapse videos on on YouTube that you can watch where you can watch a guy go through the whole project of a firearm. They're almost always going to do stuff like this. They're going to break down into small little components and pieces. They're going to start doing these booleans. They're going to do some subdivision. They're going to cut up the subdivision possibly. They might even go back through and retopo this and add a multi-resolution modifier and sculpt on it a little even. You could do things like if I duplicate this, right click and convert it to a mesh, they might run through this and they might use a remesher. Okay. So they might eventually towards the end, they might remesh it, change the voxel size. And you'll see here, we're going to take this down to anything below one, it'll go to 0.1 next. It's already pretty dense. So type in maybe like 0.5 or something and see how that works out for you. Shade it smooth if needed. Smooth shading here. And then we can do maybe smooth corrective or just smooth. And we can change the repeat amount up, maybe change the factor to 1. We can start smoothing this thing down a little bit. And so if you want to try doing something like that, that's a possibility. A lot of guys will go high on the bevels so you don't lose curvature and you don't have to use as much smoothing to fix the little shading issues. But basically, you'll do extremely high remeshes like this and then you decimate them. Okay. And if you decimate these things, you take them down by zero point 0.5 or more if needed. I think it's at zero point 0.6, but whatever the case, you'll convert it to, well, you don't have to convert it to a mesh necessarily, but even if you wanted to go this route, you can go to quad remesher. You can just use the default setup for the most part, turn adaptive size on, and it's at like 200,000. So we'll just use 200,000 quads here to get started and see if that works out fine. We can remesh it with quad remesher. Just giving you ideas on things you can do, right? That's the whole idea of this video. I'm not doing the whole weapon, but you might be able to quad remesh and get away with it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You see, it takes a little while though. So when that's done, it'll hide the original, and we'll have a quad remesh now. Okay, one of the big things to think about quad remesher though is look how we got these e-poles. All right, there's poles throughout the mesh. When you're if you're going to try to sculpt this thing, if you wanted to do that, which you possibly could, those poles will cause or wreak a lot of havoc on you, right? So just keep that in mind if you add a multi-resolution and you subdivide. You might be able to subdivide a few times. In our case, we're going to go one more time. It should take us like 3 million, I think, at that setting there or that resolution. 700,000 to 3 million. There you go. And so we go into sculpt mode. You really want to go up to like 10 million, by the way, at minimum. But anytime you have those poles, it's going to be hard to sculpt on. But here's just a little tip. The flatten tool, turn it to max real quick, max strength. It's actually well, the flatten tool. The smooth tool is actually a flatten tool. It actually flattens surfaces. Just keep that in mind. But you can sculpt on this thing now if you wanted to. And you can see with that higher resolution, um, it doesn't have as much of an effect at low strength, the smooth tool, but it is flattening the surface. So it's being used like a sander of sorts. So think about that if you're going to work with it, right? So it's definitely like a little sander. So if you want to have like a little idea of a chamfer or whatever the case, you could do stuff like this. And it's a multi-res. So you can use, like, say you do a stroke that you don't like. You have the multi-res eraser tool. You can just go back and erase it. So it's a really cool way of working. If you can get to this point, you're going to have a lot of fun with it potentially. But you will have to decimate it again before you try to bake this thing. It's just too much a lot of times um, to bake these really high resolution meshes potentially. And so, but you can add details this way possibly as well. You could use hard surface alphas, things like that, and have a lot of fun. So really, firearms at the end of the day, they're complicated. They're complicated things to make. Really, this is like a simplified version of it right now, right? But you're gonna do lots of little pieces and parts. You got to do screws, nuts, bolts, different kind of little brackets, all kinds of other fun stuff. Little notches and things like this as well, potentially, where it's got like rails and all kinds of other fun stuff. So take your time going through this process, guys, but you can make it all the way through. It takes practice. You have to just do one firearm, struggle through it, kind of think about some of these things along the way, and then do another, and then do another. Build real world firearms too before you go off designing something. Because if you're going to try to design something the first time doing a firearm, it's going to be a bad time. Okay. So just keep that in mind. Build some things first, try to replicate the parts and pieces of real firearms so you understand the process, the workflow, all the different tools available. But then, start working on your own designs later on. It'd be a little bit easier, in my opinion, to do it in that manner than just going straight to your own designs first. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, guys. You can have a ton of fun doing this. And it's pretty flexible too. Like we're not stuck here with this kind of setup per se. Like we want to go back and modify this. We already got the lattice on it. There's a lot of stuff we can do with that. We can always proportionally edit. We could just swap out the frame for a different frame later on if we wanted to, and then maybe swap the slide for a different slide. So there's, building things in parts and pieces has some benefits in that you can create variations really fast. All right. But overall, just some tools to think about, and hopefully this helps in some way with you guys that are trying to get into this kind of thing, because these are multi-day projects usually to do high poly, low poly firearms and bakes and all that. So just keep that in mind, and I hope you enjoyed the video. All right, so check you out the next one. Take care.